And then in March of 2012, my wife had a joint experience with me where an energy being appeared in our living room. That my wife had been praying the night before because our 15-year-old Jack Russell Terrier became paralyzed. So my wife was a hardcore, still is hardcore Roman Catholic. She began to pray all night, and me as a good atheist, I was like, pray all you want. Tomorrow we're going to be putting her to sleep. And then at 6 o'clock in the morning, when we woke up, the dog was still paralyzed. So I went back to bed, and my wife carried the dog down the stairs, and there she saw an energy being in the living room. And then she started calling me down, and I totally ignored her. And so finally she went upstairs and yanked me out of bed, and we both went downstairs. She wouldn't tell me what it was. And then all of a sudden, right in front of me, my wife disappeared, the dog disappeared, and I had like tunnel vision. I couldn't see anything around this circle I'm pointing to. And what it was pointing to was that energy being. And let me describe it for you.
And welcome to another installment of Behind Greatness by Inspire. This is your host, Luciano, here speaking. As usual, before we get into it, I just want to remind the listener, new or current listener, please subscribe if you haven't subscribed already. Share with your family and friends and rate us when you get a chance. We are on all major platforms, as our regular listeners know. Your auditory companionship, I love saying those two words. Your auditory companionship is what's number one, because without that, nothing can happen. I'd be remiss if I didn't remind the listener as well, if what you've been hearing or what you hear tickles your fancy and you want to hear more of it, two things. Number one is we've built a pretty cool library so far of discussions that we've had with people all over the world, exploring the what ifs and the why nots. And we're going to be doing that today for sure. But we also have charity status, non-for-profit status. So if anybody wants to donate, just go to our website, behindgreatness.org. And you can see where you can do that as well. So without further ado, here's a little background, a little quick background bio on who we have here in front of us today. His name is Rey Hernandez, and Rey was a PhD candidate at the University of California at Berkeley, where he was the recipient of a National Science Foundation PhD fellowship. He is currently the director of the Consciousness and Contact Research Institute, or CCRI, an academic research institute comprised of more than 25 PhD academics, medical doctors, and researchers whose mission is to explore the relationship between consciousness research and the phenomenology of quote unquote paranormal experiences, what CCRI calls the contact modalities. In 2018, Rey and a team of retired PhD academics published an 820-page book entitled Beyond UFOs, The Science of Consciousness and Contact with Non-Human Intelligence, which was the world's first and only comprehensive worldwide academic statistical research study on UFO contact experiencers. Over 4,300 individuals participated in over 125 countries. Rey has also published in several peer-reviewed academic journals, including the Journal of the International Academy of Consciousness and the Journal of the Society for Scientific Exploration. He has recently published 5 new books, which are a 4-volume book series, 800 pages for each volume, entitled A Greater Reality, The New Paradigm of Non-Local Consciousness, the Paranormal, and the Contact Modalities. His most recent book is titled The Mind of God, a Spiritual Virtual Reality Model of Consciousness and the Contact Modalities. CCR's website, where you can see some of this work and you can see who's involved and you can learn a little bit more about Rey, is agreaterreality.com. Welcome to the show, Rey.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Luciano.
No, it's our pleasure. I'm so glad we had the time to get to know each other a little bit, or really what's more important for us to get to know you a little bit. For the listener, they might be sick of hearing this person's name, but we're going to mention her anyway. We learned about you through Diana Pasulka and her work. We read her book, American Cosmic, and she spent quite a bit of time towards the latter half of the book talking about your story and what you were doing with the Free Foundation and the people that around you that you were involved with. And it really piqued their interest. So that's when and why we reached out to you at the beginning of the year. And since then, actually, I'm not sure if I told you, I'm not sure if you noticed, we've had Mary Rodwell on the podcast as well.
No, I wasn't aware.
Yeah. It was last 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago. So Mary Rodwell was obviously a part of what you were doing back then, or what you had started back then. Where the hell do we get started, Ray?
What is the nature of our reality? That's the bottom line here.
That's the bottom line. That's where we should get started, and that's where we should end. The nature of our reality. Okay. So why don't we start with this question? Because I don't want to throw you off with this question, but maybe it's good if I do. What is a consciousness unit?
I used the word individuated consciousness unit, and that's another way of defining what people call the human soul, the human spirit, who you are, Luciano, when you're not in your body. And then after you die, your life histories gets uploaded to the universal mind of God. Some people call it to the Akashic records. These are all just terms that we have for a process which hasn't really been clarified. But the near-death experience, the out-of-body experiences, the UFO phenomenon, the astral travel experiences via hallucinogenic journeys, communication with ghost spirits, all of these particular phenomena, which we are calling the contact modalities, they all illuminate the travels of the human soul, which to me, a better term is the individuated consciousness unit. And also Tom Campbell, I borrowed that from Tom Campbell, a physicist, in his book, My Big Toe. I think it's a much better description of the human soul, is that it has religious connotations to it. And what I'm going to be discussing and what all of the academics in our group are discussing is it's non-religious, it's outside of religious terminology.
You mentioned contact modalities as kind of a group all term, an umbrella term, the glue perhaps of all those experiences that you had mentioned, that you had listed off. Why?
All of the researchers in our organization, and you have read through them, these are all very big names, very well known in the consciousness field. Mm-hmm. People like Jeffrey Mitchell, Jeffrey Kripal, who I'm going to be speaking, giving a lecture in front of Rice University in 2 weeks. People, all the NDE professors, Bruce Grayson, Raymond Moody, et cetera, as well as several physicists, i.e. Dr. Rudy Shields from Harvard, and many others. Recently deceased Dr. Claude Swanson, PhD in physics from Princeton University, and so many of the other academics in our group. All of us hypothesize several concepts. One is that consciousness is fundamental and not our perceived physical reality. And this was a concept that was fully embraced by the early pioneers of quantum mechanics, in particular Max Planck, Nobel Prize winner, Niels Bohr, Nobel Prize winner, Erwin Schrödinger, Nobel Prize winner. I could go on and on and on. Sir James Jeans, not a Nobel Prize winner, but right up there with all these other individuals that I previously mentioned. And I could go on for the next half hour. All of these physicists that adhere to the thesis that our reality is an illusion, for lack of a better word. The Hindus in the Upanishads use the word Maya, and that our true reality is a greater reality that we just cannot perceive. And I won't go into all the specifics of why and how they reached that conclusion, these physicists, but I just want to start with that platform. This is not metaphysics. This is not woo-woo science. This is hardcore quantum mechanics reached that conclusion. And then many individuals that were interested in the theoretical constructs of the paranormal have also reached that conclusion. One is Dr. Edgar Mitchell, the sixth man to walk on the moon, one of my mentors, and he founded the Institute of Noetic Sciences in 1972. And that is now known as the world's leading academic research institute on the psi phenomenon. Dr. Dean Radin, who's the lead scientist at IONS, that's the name of the organization, also adheres to the thesis that consciousness is fundamental. So that's one major premise. Now, what I added to the link here is the thesis that all of the paranormal contact modalities, i.e., near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences, astral travel experiences, the UFO phenomenon, the ghost and spirit phenomenon, hallucinogenics, LSD, magic mushrooms, psilocybin is the ingredient in that, and also DMT, which is derived from ayahuasca. All of these experiences are currently being perceived by the vast majority of people that research those fields as separate and distinct phenomena. And I was one of the first individuals to write about that they're all interrelated and under consciousness, that it should not be seen as separate and distinct phenomena. But I wasn't the first person to publicize this. Many of the individuals in our organization adhere to that. However, they never publicly presented that to the public. Many of them were academics still teaching in the universities, and that really was a wild concept. Many of these individuals, like Jeffrey Mitchell, alluded to it over the 40 years of his program, New Thinking Aloud, but he never directly stated that. He had others that he interviewed directly stated that. For example, Dr. John Alexander. We don't need to get into that specific, but also more recently, Dr. Eben Alexander, same. He and I think 100% alike. A professor of neurosurgery at the Harvard Medical School. He taught residents in neuroscience how to operate on the brain for over 15 years. And all of a sudden, he had a near-death experience that totally blew him away. And he quit teaching, and he dedicates all his time now to the study of consciousness. What is consciousness? What is the nature of our reality? And many, many, many others have spoken about it, but no one has really unified all these people. And that's what I have done. I've brought them all together under one umbrella because they share the same hypotheses, and they've all been working as individuated units of consciousness, as separate and distinct individuals on this project. And so that's my role. And plus, I'm a researcher of consciousness and the contact modalities via the work that I started back in 2013 with the Dr. Edgar Mitchell FREE Foundation.
So there's a few things I want to touch upon. Before we get to FREE, because our regular listener will know, will have understood that we have a fascination with Dr. Edgar Mitchell's work. And we have been talking about FREE up until now. So we had kind of introduced you a couple of podcast episodes back. So we're chomping at the bit to talk about FREE. But before that, you mentioned two things quickly for the listener as well. You mentioned names like Dean Radin, Jeffrey Kripal, Bruce Grayson, John Alexander. These are all folks that have been also on our program, and we've gotten a little bit about their beliefs, their thoughts, their philosophy, and their work. So it's great. It just worked out that way that we've been able to have conversations with them before we get to you, which it wasn't done. It wasn't done purposely, intentionally, but I'm so glad that we have those kind of under our belt, those conversations, so that our listener can go there.
Also, I failed to mention Gary Schwartz, tenured professor at Harvard, at Yale, and now at the University of Arizona, and also another brilliant man, Stephen A. Schwartz. Again, one of the leading pioneers. He's not a PhD academic, but his knowledge is just like any PhD academic. So
we're recording with him.
Organization.
Well, yes, you told me that. We're recording with Stefan next week. And in fact, it was you who let us know about him.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Yeah, I didn't tell you.
He's extremely important for this field.
Yes. Fascinating stories that he's had over decades. Yes, we're excited to have him on. Back to you. And this is the question that I promised to have after I commented on those names that you mentioned. So we've had a few conversations with scientists and MDs recently about the subjective experience and the importance of the subjective experience. We've had scientists on as well. And I shouldn't just say scientists, but it seems to be scientists and artists who haven't had subjective experiences. And thus we couldn't have another dimension to the conversation that we're about to have here. It seems to be when somebody has a subjective experience, a personal experience that they cannot explain, the weirdness of that experience opens up a portal of disbelief and belief at the same time.
That's
And
correct.
you weren't always doing this. In fact, you were living your life 180 degrees from what you're doing now. So you were and are just a normal, average guy like all of us,
Mhm.
but a portal opened for you. Do you mind sharing those couple of things that happened?
Sure. This discussion might take an entire day, but
Well, let's summarize it. Let's
I'll
summarize.
give you an extremely
It's true.
summarized version of it.
Yes.
Previous to March of 2012, I was an overeducated materialist atheist. I had gone to Cornell University. Before that, at Rutgers. Cornell was a straight A student for a master's in city and regional planning. At Rutgers, my last 3 years were all straight A's. And then at Berkeley, I had a straight A average as well.
Mm-hmm.
And for Berkeley was a PhD in city and regional planning. And I had gotten a National Science Foundation while I was at Cornell that allowed me to apply to any PhD program in the country, and it would be paid for. My tuition, my room and board, and a nice healthy chunk to live off. A very prestigious, one of the most prestigious academic scholarships that one can get for a PhD student. And so I never finished it because my ex-wife had a brain aneurysm while I was writing my dissertation. And we had 2 small children. Her mother was living with us. Her sister, who was in high school, was living with us. So I had to dismiss writing my dissertation and take 2 full-time jobs. Mm-hmm. So that's why. If not, I would be about ready to retire from an institution like MIT or Harvard or Berkeley at that level, because that's where most of the students from Berkeley went on to teach. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, 2 colleagues that I referred to go into the PhD program, because I taught an undergraduate class to minority students. They both are now full tenured professors about to be retired at UCLA. So that was my mindset. That's my background as a PhD academic. And then because I didn't have the PhD associated with it, I was all but dissertation. My options were limited. I could not teach at a university, at a major university. I could certainly teach at community colleges, but my mindset was at a much higher level. And so what I did is I went to law school. I was teaching at the City University of New York and working there. I had written a grant for them at the City University of New York of almost $4 million. And they got the grant. And so the dean at that school asked for me to come in to administer that grant. So what it is I took an opportunity to go to law school at the City University of New York full-time. So I worked full-time and I went to law school full-time. And so for the last 25 years, I've been working as a full-time estate tax attorney for the U.S. Department of Treasury. And then in March of 2012, my wife had a joint experience with me where an energy being appeared in our living room that my wife had been praying the night before because our 15-year-old Jack Russell Terrier became paralyzed. So my wife was a hardcore, still is hardcore Roman Catholic. She began to pray all night. And me as a good atheist, I was like, pray all you want. Tomorrow we're going to be putting him to sleep. And then at 6 o'clock in the morning, when we woke up, the dog was still paralyzed. So I went back to bed and my wife carried the dog down the stairs. And there she saw an energy being in the living room. And then she started calling me down and I totally ignored her. And so finally she went upstairs and yanked me out of bed. And we both went downstairs. She wouldn't tell me what it was. And then all of a sudden, right in front of me, my wife disappeared, the dog disappeared, and I had like tunnel vision. I couldn't see anything around this circle I'm pointing to. And what it was pointing to was that energy being. And let me describe it for you. It was about 2.5 feet wide, about a foot in height, made up of numerous colors. It was waving like a desert mirage, and it was transparent. You could see the couch behind it, but it was numerous colors were waving. It was pure energy. And then whatever that object was totally controlled my consciousness, my thoughts. And I looked at it, and I remember squinting at it, and I said, this is BS. This is what she got me up for at 6 o'clock in the morning for this junk. I'm going back to sleep.
But your wife disappeared.
Yeah, she disappeared. I didn't even care. I didn't care about that. I didn't care about that. I didn't care that I was watching that, because that intelligence, later on, I found out through a series of experiences that what we're dealing with has the ability to get into your consciousness and totally reprogram it at their will. Extremely sophisticated stuff. So anyway, I went backstairs. I went to sleep. Immediately, I was knocked out. And then an hour later, like about almost 7 o'clock, I woke up. And I realized, I said, my God, what the hell just happened? And I ran downstairs. And my wife popped back into reality. And she looks down, and the dog is running around the entire living room. And she's freaking out. She's saying, hallelujah, hallelujah, the angels cured her, the angels cured her. And for me, it was like an atom bomb exploded in my brain. And then I began to ask her, I said, where were you? Where were you? Look at the time, it's 7 o'clock. And she looked at the clock. It was an hour later, but she said, I didn't go anywhere. I just went downstairs with you. I looked down, and Nana, which is the name of our dog, was running around cured. So she started to celebrate. She had no idea. Later on, I found out that this concept is called missing time. Mm. And so that was our first initial experience. She drew what she saw. I drew what I saw. Was slightly different, actually greatly different, because she saw like an upside down U, sort of like a craft inside the house, very large. It was, again, like about 3 feet wide and about 1.5 feet in height. And then I drew what I saw. And it was what I explained to you earlier. Yeah. Yeah. And then my wife would go out at night, and she would pray at night. And guess what would show up? These huge UAPs, commonly called UFOs, what I now call CAPs, Consciousness Aerial Phenomenon. And then she went to Mexico for a month to be with her family. She went there with my daughter. And then after she got back, she told me that all these UFOs would appear to her very up close, not far away, like a little tiny speck in the sky, but these huge objects. And then she said it was witnessed by her family and friends. So I called them up, and I verified all of this.
So what do you mean?
That's when
you called up her family and friends, you mean?
Yes, yeah, correct. Okay. And her sister, who was an attorney in Mexico, and the two her two children, my daughter's niece. They were both teenagers, and they verified that, what they saw, and not once but several times. And then her friends as well. And so then I realized that this was UFO related, and because I remember she had told me, she said it appeared to be like a small spaceship inside our living room. And I didn't understand what that was. I could associate with it was. And why would she use the word nave? Nave means like a spacecraft in Spanish. Why would she use those terms, And so it's much more profound than what we both suspect, even still to this day. And so then she began to have precognitive events. She knew that if we took this car on a long trip, a car that's less than 3 years old, that the engine was going to explode. And she was like, no, we're not going to go. We're not going to go. And it was going to be to our very first UFO conference in Sebring, Florida, because I want to know what the hell is going on here.
Yeah.
And so she was like she wasn't going to go, period. No discussions. So after like a week before we were supposed to go, I put the car to the mechanic, and he goes, Ray, thank God you didn't take that car on that trip, because the whole engine would have exploded, and he told, you had to fix the car. And then she detected a tumor in my back, a very large tumor that I didn't know. She was just like, I know it's there. I know it's there. I said, well, what do you mean? How do you know it's there? I just know it. And then she would like scan with her hand the back of it. She goes, yep, it's there. And so I'm like freaking out. Is this woman going crazy or what?
It's like
Well,
Chris Bledsoe.
after her harassing me, for like weeks, I finally went to the doctor, my primary care physician, and he touched there. He says, it appears like you've got something there, So he ordered x-rays and boom, there was an object in the back of, in my back. And it was large because they made like a big scar to take it out. And so she was having all of these precognitive events. Another one was about the coming ecological disasters for humanity. And out of the blue, we were talking about something else, and all of a sudden it just came out like a robotic voice. And she started telling me there's going to be a thinning of population. It's needed. We're going to be living like Native Americans, using native natural remedies to cure each other and blah, 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 blah. There's going to be billions dying, but it's important to get a reboot for humanity. My wife doesn't talk that way, And so all of a sudden she just stopped and she like, what the hell just happened,
Wow.
And I said, where did you hear that? She goes, I didn't hear it anywhere. Where did you read it? I didn't read it anywhere.
Did she give a year? Did she give a year?
No. And like after that, I don't want to talk anymore. And she went upstairs and she went to bed. So like about 10 minutes later, I went up there to ask her a series of questions. She was knocked out. The next day, she couldn't remember anything. She couldn't remember anything.
So this brought you down a rabbit hole.
Well, that was before I called down this huge UAP. I call it CAP, consciousness aerial phenomenon, because that's what they are. Okay.
Well, so before you get onto that, that's where I remember where I was in Mexico, exactly where on the beach in Mexico when I was reading the page describing the story you were just about describing in Dan Pasolka's book, and I just closed the book. I said, this is bananas. And then I opened the book again.
It's bananas. It's bananas. It really is. There was a period there for about a week where I started to drink, because it was nonstop paranormal experiences. Okay, and that's very common for experiencers and also NDE experiencers, right, and experiencers of the other contact modalities, because it's all intertwined. Yes. If you have, we're talking about major experiencers, not someone that saw a little light in the sky and you say, move it to the right, and it moves to the right, and you say, move to the left, it moves to the left. No, that's Mickey Mouse stuff. We're talking about hardcore major experiences.
In your living room, healing your dog. Yes.
Yes, and all the other stuff that happened later on.
So you called down this UAP. I'm sorry, I interrupted there.
Yes. It was my wife had told me about what had happened in Mexico, and then I remember seeing this video of this man named Prophet Yahweh, this heavyset black man. He was speaking Hebrew, and then these little specks would appear in the day, and he'd be recording them. And the one that I saw was an NBC camera crew. They were totally laughing, dismissing this guy. And then all of a sudden, when they saw those specks moving around in the sky in the daylight, all of a sudden, okay, back to the studio. They didn't want to move forward with that. And so I was waiting for a friend of mine to give me parking tickets. I was gonna do a motion to consolidate them all, And so it was like a favor for a friend, and me being an attorney, I know how to do these things. And so I'm waiting for him. He doesn't appear. So I remember watching that video from the night before, and I said, holy cow, this guy, Prophet Yahweh, is doing it at will. My wife is doing it at will. What the hell? Let's give it a try, And so in the beginning, it was just killing time, waiting for my friend to come. And then later on, I became much more sincere. It was much more loving, because I wanted to show them my gratitude for healing our dog, who's like our first child. And then towards the very end, it was like a very emotional event for me. And then after like 15 minutes, because I would stop every minute to look around, I didn't see anything. And then after 15 minutes, I had a thought. And the thought was, I don't want to cuss, but what a freaking, what,
Be you. Don't worry.
Yeah. I'm going crazy. I need to stop this stuff because I'm going down this rabbit hole. And so immediately after I had that thought, I looked right on top of my next door neighbor's house was this huge object. It was 100 meters tall, 600 meters back. Okay. And let me describe what it was comprised, because this is important for the next thing I'm going to tell you. How I eventually concluded these were holographic projections. Okay. And how this intelligence is able to upload, your memories and download them back. But before we get to that, let me describe. What I was watching was these oblong streaks of light that were very, very long. Okay, as I said, 600 meters back. Okay, and it was 100 meters tall. So they formed like the skeleton. Let's think of a dinosaur, right?
Mm-hmm.
Huge dinosaur in the sky, and all these skeletons, these rib cages, are forming the whole skeleton of it. Except this was made up of these oblong streaks of light, and inside was this white plasma swirling around, but it was transparent. You could see the clouds behind it. It was one of these nights that was purely cloudy. The clouds were very low, okay? And so you saw the clouds all behind it, okay? And the distance was only 30 feet, which is 10 meters away, the bottom part of this object. Then all of a sudden, I'm watching this for about 10 minutes. Then all of a sudden I hear a voice. I didn't know what a telepathic communication was. I'd never had that in my life, okay? So I thought there was my daughter talking to me, and I'm like looking around and stuff like that. And what it was my daughter's voice saying, Daddy, you and Mommy have seen UFOs. The next time you guys see a UFO, you call me, Daddy, all right? Don't forget, okay? My daughter's 10 years old. I never told her anything about our experiences. My wife never told her anything about these experiences, okay? But yet, here was this voice of my daughter, right? And so when I realized my daughter's not around me, I thought to myself, I said, which they put that thought in there, my goodness, my daughter wants to see it. My daughter wants to see it. So I'm running to the window, which is like less than, 10 feet away. And I'm yelling out the window, her name to come outside. So she puts up the window. She goes, what is it, Daddy? I said, and this was like 9:45 at night,
Mm-hmm.
This was in the summer. So she didn't have any school. And so she heard me yelling and screaming. So she opened up the window. I said, run outside. There's a UFO out here. Run outside, run outside. And so in a couple of seconds, she's out there and next to me. And she's like, with her mouth wide open, she was like, Daddy, what is that? What is that? I said, sweetheart, have you ever heard of a UFO? She said, yes. She said, it's a UFO, but it's hiding. It doesn't want to be fully materialized. It doesn't want to show itself because we have a Homestead military base, an airport base, Air Force base, which is not that far away. And plus we've got the Miami airport, tons of traffic. So at that point, I was still thinking like a materialist. And then we were watching this for another 15, 20 minutes, my daughter and I. We weren't scared. We were just in awe, like we're watching the 4th of July fireworks. And then all of a sudden, my friend comes. He doesn't come alone. He came with his wife and their 17-year-old daughter. All right. So the 17-year-old daughter hooked up with my daughter. So they were together talking about what they were watching. And so his friend and his wife came next to me. They go, Ray, what the hell is that? What the hell is that? I said, damn well what it is. And they said, no, impossible. So for the next 2 minutes, they were trying to explain this away. Okay. So after 2 minutes, I just busted out laughing because I couldn't control myself anymore because I didn't tell them that I called this thing down. Because that would have been sensory overload for them, And so, but then after about a minute and a half or so, I had a thought. Let me tell them that, look, what they're showing is no good, right? So in my head, I communicated to this intelligence, and can I cuss here? Can I say a little cuss word?
100%, whatever you want.
Okay, I said, you better come up with some better bullshit than this because my friends don't believe you. That's verbatim what I thought. Okay, verbatim. You better come up with some better bullshit than this because my friends don't believe you. Okay, I was born and raised in New York, so during that time period, my New York came out.
You came out there for a moment, yeah.
Yes, and so immediately what we were watching totally disappeared and instantaneously replaced by a totally different object. Okay, and what it was now. Inside that area, remember, this was, 100 meters from the roof of my neighbor's house. Yeah. It wasn't stars up in the sky at a distance. It was very close by. Okay? Within that area that occupied that previous object that I described, now there were about 50 large orbs the size of Volkswagens. Okay, and they were all turning off and turning on. the illumination that they had inside. So it was like on and off, on and off, on and off, on and off like that throughout the entirety of that object, the 50 round orbs. Okay. And then they would take turns by quadrants, by sections. They would go big like this, and then they would get small. So that, you know how the moon is at night sometimes, they would get very, very large. It would get like that, huge, and then back down. So naturally, my friends stopped trying to explain this away, because what we were watching now, you could not explain it, okay? And then after like 10 minutes, they left. And I didn't even question them leaving. I was like, what are you, crazy, man? What are you going to see this again in your life? This is a once in a lifetime experience, blah, blah, blah. No, they just, Ray, we got businesses to run. We got to go, blah. I was, oh, don't worry about that motion to consolidate. I'll have it ready for you tomorrow,
Yeah, the tickets. Yeah, we get down to the tickets.
And in hindsight, when you're thinking about it, you're like, that is crazy, of how that occurred. They just left after 10 minutes, and I didn't even care that they left. Also, the next door neighbor, he and his wife turned on the light in their living room, and they saw three strangers, and the next door neighbor and his daughter, which they knew very well. I won't mention their names, but did you think I bothered to knock on their door and say, look, come outside, look what that was on top of your roof? Or for them to come outside, why the hell I've got these 5 people looking at my roof like it's on fire? That never took place. Okay, that's another anomaly. And then all of a sudden, after my friends left, after about 10 minutes, I felt I was being attacked by mosquitoes, hundreds of mosquitoes. I was wearing a white T-shirt, shorts, because this is August in Miami, very hot. And so I was slapping my arms, slapping my legs. And after like 2 minutes, I couldn't take it anymore because I was eaten up alive. So I got my daughter, I grabbed my daughter, and I said, come on, I won't mention her name, let's go inside. These mosquitoes are killing me. And my wife was waiting right at the front door with our dog. And our dog is one of these little dogs that's always barking and screaming and yelling when she hears voices, the Jack Russell Terrier. She never came outside, okay? And so right there in the front door, I'm telling my wife what happened. And then when I'm telling her about the mosquitoes, right, my daughter turns around and looks at me and she goes, Daddy, there were no mosquitoes outside. And all of a sudden, it's like, I'm 66 years old, but I remember I was a freshman in college. I saw this man called the Amazing Kreskin. Yeah, he was a hypnotist, okay? Yeah. He would put people quacking like ducks, walking like chickens and stuff like that, regular students. And so when he would count to 3 and snap his finger, they would wake up. That's how I felt. I felt like the Amazing Kreskin snapped his finger, counted to 3, and boom, I woke up. And I was like, oh my God, what the hell just happened? I was in a trance. Wow. I didn't even know it. And so I quickly ran downstairs. I grabbed my camcorder and my professional camera, and I ran outside. Nothing was there. Okay. Yeah. So that was my second major experience. And then what I learned from that major experience was that what we were watching was actually a holographic projection. Jacques Vallée talked about it in several of his books.
Trying to get him on the podcast too. Yes, Jacques Vallée.
Yeah, he spoke about it in several of his books. But what it is these are non-materialist concepts. Mm-hmm. These are, the concepts that defy space-time, okay? And so what happened was I realized, I said, my God, here I was telling them, you better come up with some better bullshit. And what we were watching totally disappeared, replaced by something totally different. That's, in common layman's terms, is called a holographic projection. Yeah, there probably is much better terminology to explain that happened, But what it was, that this is an image that was projected maybe into our own individual consciousness for us to perceive that, okay? I don't think it was something that's external, like what we perceive to be a hologram, which is an external light beams, that form that holographic projection. These are all consciousness, multidimensional projections into our consciousness.
So can I assume that there was a linking with your daughter and with your friend and his wife and his daughter at the same time? That there's a
yes, of course,
of course.
My daughter has had other experiences since then, and my friend, I've spoken about him a couple of times, but they don't want to talk about it. Absolutely, they did do a drawing. I went to their home. I asked, draw what you saw. So at least, I got to understand what they saw. And they drew pretty much exactly what my daughter drew. Mine was much more detailed, much more sophisticated. So we were all watching the same thing. And one last thing with the mosquitoes, okay? These were not there. My daughter verified they were not there. But in my mind, okay, I was being attacked by hundreds of mosquitoes. And I ran across that same concept when you had this man who, I don't know if you're familiar with this organization called MUFON.
Yes,
they study
vaguely.
UFO sightings, UFO sightings.
But physical sightings, yeah.
They're purely materialist organization.
Yeah.
And so I remember this man who was the head of MUFON from Florida. He came down to Miami and he gave a lecture, and which just happened to be a few months after my experiences. And he talked about a case back in the 70s, I think it was, in the 1970s, where you had these two scientists from Cape Canaveral. They were out in the Everglades. They were hiking and, nature loving, that type of thing. And then they saw this huge orb that was moving in and about the trees, but it was gigantic. And then all of a sudden, they were attacked by hundreds of mosquitoes. So they started to run away because it was like, a saturation of mosquitoes. So it started running and running and running. And come a point, they didn't feel the bites anymore. So then they turned around, that huge object that they were watching was gone. And we're talking about an object that's, in the forest, in the woods there of the Everglades. It must have been like a pine ridge type of area that they were hiking in. And so again, the same concept, attacked by mosquitoes to encourage them to leave. And then once they leave and they turn around, that object they were watching disappeared. And then I began to realize, my goodness, these are all consciousness-based phenomena. And then with the explosion of my experiences, that assured 110% that these were conscious-based phenomena. So let me just make an introduction to the next segment.
Let's breathe. Segment. Hold on. Let's breathe, Rey. So heavy. You promised us a summary, but I'm glad you lied.
No, because you can't, a summary is not going to give you anything.
No. Well, okay. So before we go into number 3, because I want us to go into number 3. And I read about your number 3 through Dana's book. I was just watching just a quick side note. It just came up in my feed again today. It first came up in my feed, my YouTube feed, about a month ago. I think it was more or less when we spoke the first time. Muhammad Ali, Johnny Carson's show, invited to come on and talk about his fight with Ken Norton, and Ken Norton was there. And the first thing that he was in his robe, but they were going to do a weigh-in, and you could see he just dismissed the silliness of this whole thing. He started to talk about the UFOs that he was seeing while he was training, jogging in the morning.
I saw that video.
Yeah. And they were laughing at first. They were laughing. Johnny Carson was a little condescending. Yeah. Then they realized, this guy is serious.
That's right.
It's Muhammad Ali. So let's not laugh too hard, right? But
a couple of other cases, very famous name, John Lennon, very famous case of the UFO that he saw in Manhattan. Also, David Bowie, very well known, his sighting of a UFO. And also he got into consciousness as well after that. So I think he was a contactee. He just never fully disclosed his experiences, because he even talked about holographic projections as well, David Bowie. I have his quotes from an interview. And so these are just, 3 of very well-known folks. And there are literally hundreds of people that are very, very well known that have spoken about these things in the past, but they never elaborated, to go into details.
Well, I believe there are millions of us here that have experienced stuff and not either explained it away or ignore it, or don't want to share for the obvious reason of ridicule.
And not just the UFO, out-of-body experiences.
Yeah.
My goodness, I was waiting at an airport because we were flight delayed when I came down to Miami. And my goodness, I met 3 people that had out-of-body experiences. Okay, 3. There was a hospice nurse, and I asked her about post-death visions. Okay, she's now directs the whole hospice program in certain Tri-County area near Albany, New York. And so I told her about, pre-death visions of people that have family and friends. They're seeing a ghost or a spirit together with the person that's about to die, or the person that's about to die telling them, Mama, Bobby. My father had that, okay? Yeah. And so so she says, Once we hear that, we know they only got a few days. So they write it on the chart.
Yeah.
Saw his mother and father, or saw a relative. They knew it was 2 or 3 days later they're going to die. That's how common this is to hospice, people that work in hospice care. And so she's telling me that story. You're right there in front of me in the airport where 3 people have had NDEs. Why? Because all the time I'm talking about these things. All the time.
Nurses and nuns have all these stories. And I say nuns because, I had a great aunt that was a nun. And she left the nunnery like in her 60s and became a nurse. Or actually, she was a registered nurse. She just worked at a hospital as a nurse. But they were the caregivers. They were the people who were close to the humanity of it all and beyond.
But also, as a side note, I went to get a haircut. This is about a year ago. 2 of the barbers had major paranormal experiences.
Love it.
Why? Because I started talking about it. All of a sudden, I had something, and he told his story. And then the other guy was sweeping the floor. The other barber said, that ain't shit, and starts telling his story, And then the 2 phlebotomists had some blood work done. This is about maybe 9 months ago. 2 phlebotomists, okay? One had an NDE. After her NDE, she began to see deceased people, which is extremely common among NDE experiencers. And the other elderly lady who was actually taking my blood out, she said that her husband had an NDE and that she saw the ghost of her deceased mother in her living room. So I said, have you guys ever spoken to each other about these things? No. Have you guys ever talked to anyone else about these things? No. Who the hell are we going to tell? So you see what I'm getting at? That these experiences are extremely common, but people just don't talk about it. But one of the purposes of my work, what we're trying to do is make it conducive so people are able to talk about it like it's not paranormal. It's actually very normal.
You synthesized it with a whole bunch of scientists, with peer-reviewed journals, so that you can quote unquote legitimize something that you already understand is legitimate because of your subjective experience.
Correct. It's through the experiences. And then later on, the mentorship that I received from Edgar Mitchell, from Rudy Shields, from all these other scientists that became part of FREE, and then later on the CCRI organization. But what I want to do is I want to be able to touch a little bit about it. Gave me how this intelligence that we're dealing with gave me spirituality. Yeah,
that story number 3.
The story number 3, and it could go on for a very long time.
Well, I promised you an hour.
Story 4, story 5, story 6.
We might have to do like a second part here because we're already coming up to an hour. But let's do story 3. Yeah, please.
Let me start by saying this. Yeah. I cannot be doing the work that I'm doing if I'm not a spiritual person. And what I mean by spirituality, I need to be able to understand, not a belief, but to know that I'm an eternal spiritual being. Okay. So how did I get to that point from, someone that was at Berkeley, studying, sciences, National Science Foundation, PhD fellowship, a tax attorney with the IRS, total atheist, I would have bet anyone all of my life savings that you could never convince me to become a non-atheist, a believer in the afterlife, okay? So how did that process start? Let me tell you how it started. The day after, and again, these are all orchestrated events. I want to emphasize to you that all of my experiences have been orchestrated events. This is just an illustration. Later on, I'm going to talk about how the FREE Foundation was started. That was an orchestrated event, clear. So after I saw that huge UFO, okay, the next day, I was on YouTube because I'm trying to learn all these things about UFOs at that time, to continue learning about it, understand what happened to me the day before. And boom, this, YouTube puts suggestions out there, right? Yeah. One of the suggestions was on near-death experiences. So I clicked on that video and I was like blown away, totally blown away, okay? And so then all of a sudden I spent the whole night listening to testimonies, NDE testimonies, one after another. It's like 6 a.m.
Fascinating.
And then immediately I ordered like 20 used books from Amazon, okay? I began reading 4 hours a day. Then it went to 6 hours a day. There was 8 hours a day, then 10 hours a day, then 12 hours a day, and then 16 hours a day. Okay. When there were 5 books left, I would order 20 more, 20 used books.
You jumped in the deep end.
Yes. It was 5 books left, 20 more. Okay. And so this was going on for 4 months, okay? The only person that knew I was reading all these NDE books was my wife, because they would come in the mail, and she would open them up and, here's another book for you, when are you going to get back to work? And she had threatened to divorce me at that time because I was turning into a raging lunatic. I wasn't shaving, I wasn't showering, I wasn't brushing my teeth, I wasn't caring about, my daughter or any type of daily activities. I was just reading these books at the end, 16 hours a day.
Can I say at that point you were in the middle of disillusionment? You were a confused individual?
No, I wasn't totally confused. I was consumed.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
I all the hours of my breathing life, I had to be devoted to this. That was the feeling. Okay. And then 3 days in a row, December 21st, 2012, December 22nd, 2012, December 23rd, 2012. Later on, someone told me, Ray, do you know the significance of December 21st, 2012? I said, I don't know. So that's the Mayan calendar. That's the date where the world is going to shift. And I still don't fully understand it because I'm not into metaphysics. I never was.
Amazing.
But,
We're going to have a Mayan spiritual leader come on in the next couple of weeks. Can you imagine?
Well, maybe he could explain this. He could explain that December 21st, 2012. But all I know is that those 3 days in a row, the very first 3 people I ever mentioned NDEs to, all of them had it. Okay. Now, what are the statistical probabilities of that happening?
0.
0. Okay. Anyway, here it was. The first one was my daughter's pediatrician. She's originally from Colombia, short, very thin. Her name is Claudia Herrera. Okay. And so my daughter had a low-grade fever for 2 days and said, I got some good news. She doesn't have a fever. I checked her ear, nose, and throat. She's clean. Maybe it was a virus, right? So, okay, good. And then all of a sudden, a robotic voice comes out of my mouth, okay? Excuse me, doctor. Have you ever heard the term near-death experiences? I've just finished reading approximately 300 books on this topic. Many were written by medical doctors such as yourself, and it's a phenomenon that you need to know about, right? So in my head, I was like, what the, is going on? I am going crazy. My wife is telling me I need to go to a psychiatrist to give me medication because I'm going nuts. And I said, I've finally gone nuts. I've got another personality, inside my brain. At that time, I was thinking like a materialist,
Mm-hmm.
And so her eyeballs pop out like this. So I said, oh my God, now this woman thinks I'm crazy, And I go, excuse me, doctor, I apologize. I don't know why I said that. She goes, there's no need to apologize. How did you know I had one? Okay.
Beautiful.
And my daughter was next to me the whole time. Remember I told you my daughter is an experiencer?
Yeah.
Here was this medical doctor telling my daughter and myself about her own near-death experience. And she told me all the details, which we don't have time to go into those details, but it was mind-blowing, okay? Then the next day at church, it was a social gathering at church, okay? It was a dinner Saturday night. And my wife was like, anything with the church, my wife insisted that I go there. So there she sat next to her Mexican friend and her husband. I'd never met the man. So we introduced each other. And he said, oh, you're Cuban too? I said, yeah, I was born and raised and born in Cuba. But I came when I was young. He says, oh, me too. So we had these pleasantries, exchanges for like 2 minutes or so.
I had no idea you were from Cuba. But sorry, go ahead.
Cuba. And so I got, excuse me, Max, have you ever heard the term near-death experiences? I've just finished reading approximately 300 books on this topic, and it's a phenomenon that you need to know about, right? And I'm like, definitely Monday morning, I need to look up all the shrinks in Miami. I need to start scheduling an appointment because I'm not right, I'm going crazy. And so Max goes, my God, Ray, I've never told this to anyone. And then he told me about the near-death experience of his mother. She died a year ago, okay? And he was giving her CPR in his living room and crying on top of her, talking to her, whatever. And so when she was resuscitated on the way to the hospital, when he got there and finally talked to her, she said, I was above your body. You were crying on top of me. You told me this, you told me this, you told me this, you told me that. And then all of a sudden, I even on top of the ambulance. When the ambulance was taken off, I was on top of the ambulance. And she said that a heavy black man, like 6'3", like a football player, comes crashing through the door. And behind him was a short white woman with a blonde ponytail. He goes, "But Mom, how did you know that? Those are the paramedics. I already told you I was floating on top of you. I was watching and hearing everything, you know." So he's telling me and even more about her mom's NDE. Now, Ray, being the good materialist that he is, the good atheist or that he was, the good atheist that he was, and the materialist that he was, it did not sink in, okay? I didn't associate 4 months of being a crazy madman reading these 300 NDE books to what will happen on Friday, what happened on Saturday, right? So I said, I got to go and tell this to my father, because my father was very, very ill, bedridden. He died like about a year later after this incident I'm about to tell you. And he had only been to church twice. And all the time he was like, "God damn this, God damn that, God damn this." This is before he had this event, which was a quadruple heart bypass. This was 16 years before I told this story. So I said, I need to tell him what happened on Friday, what happened on Saturday. Not all the other crazy paranormal experience and the UFO stuff that happened to me, but at least these last 2 days. So at least if he dies, he can go away with some sense of spirituality, right? And me as a non-believer, telling me, thinking like this. And so I go to my parents' home. I usually went there on the weekends. And so I tell him, I told my mother, we need to get Pop dressed. I need to tell him the story, right? So we got him dressed. He was had a walker. We walked him outside to the patio. And so it was still a warm night in Miami. It wasn't cool at all. And mind you, this was December 23rd, 2012, okay? And then I told him what happened on Friday, what happened on Saturday. And he goes, "That happened to me." I go, "What?" Like, I couldn't believe it. I said, What are you talking about?" And then he says, "Remember when I had that quadruple heart bypass surgery?" He said, "I floated out of my body, and I was floating on top of my body, watching the operation and my body underneath me." He says, "I didn't know that was me, because I thought me was up there, And he was on top of the operating. And then he said, all of a sudden, a vacuum cleaner sucked him up. Those are his words. "A vacuum cleaner sucked me up." And he was traveling through the tunnel. He had the whole tunnel thing. And then through the light. And once the light dissipated, waiting for him in young age, in the 30s, was his father, mother, and his brother, all previously deceased. They then communicated, and he didn't use the word telepathic. He just said that I just communicated with my mind. They weren't, their lips weren't moving. It was just we were talking, and he communicated with them. And then they presented him to a being that he knew was God. Now, mind you, my father was also a total atheist, but he told me that once this being appeared to him right in front of me, he said it was huge, pure energy. He said it knew it was God. Then this intelligence gave my father what is commonly called a life review.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I'm not going to go into the details of what he told me because it was quite extensive. But what he did tell me was that time doesn't exist. I said, "What do you mean time doesn't exist?" He says, "I was up there 20 or 30 years. God was showing me all the good things I'd done in my life and all the bad things for like 20 or 30 years. Okay. And then he said, hell doesn't exist. I said, how do you know hell doesn't exist? Because God is pure love. Okay. And then he tells me that all of that happened to him was not to judge him, where to send him to heaven and hell. He says, that doesn't exist. He says, because God. I said, why? What are you saying? I said, because God is pure love. And I was like, another atom bomb blew up in my brain.
Sure.
This is my father telling me this. This is one of the world's biggest atheists, like I was, and he's telling me all this stuff, but I didn't know about it. So I turned to my mother. All of a sudden, he said, he didn't want to talk about it anymore. I don't talk about it anymore. I don't talk about it. I said, "But Pop, blah, 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 blah." I asked him a question. "No, I don't talk about it." "But Pop, blah, blah. God damn it, I don't talk about it anymore, And so that's it. I knew my father, when he did that, it's like, that's it,
Yeah.
So I turned to my mother. And I said, "Mom," and right next to my father, I said, "Did he ever tell you these things?" And he says, "Only once." And when he was waking up out of surgery, he was like insistent on telling me something. And I was like, "Go back to sleep. You just came out of surgery. Go back to sleep." No, I need to tell you. I need to go back to sleep. Go back. You just got out of surgery. Again, God damn it. I need to tell you something. So that was when she first heard it. It was the same thing that he told us. I said, have you ever spoken about that since? And my mother said, no, never. That's 16 years.
Interesting, that generation. Interesting.
So then on my way home, I put down my windows. I don't know why I'm going like this because it's an electric window. I put down my windows and I looked outside and I see a few stars, and so for the first time in my life, I talked to God. I said, God, thank you so much, because in a 4-month period, you managed to totally transform an atheist, materialist, rationalist into someone that doesn't have a belief. No, I don't have a belief. I know that God exists, that you exist. Okay? And I have that knowingness more than any Catholic priest in Miami. And so since then, I've had this rapport. Okay? And I not only spoke to God, but I also spoke with the intermediaries that have appeared to me and that I've worked with. Okay? I call them modern angels. Modern angels, because it's not, anything associated with religion. And these are the intermediaries of the mind of God. And so that's what gave me spirituality. So I know now, based upon, here's another thing, the fourth experience.
I want to talk about those intermediaries, because I didn't know about that either.
Yeah, no, it's mind-blowing. But before Free got started, I realized at that point, my goodness, we're dealing with something that deals with the afterlife, that deals with something outside of our greater reality. And then I began to read lots of books on consciousness. And not only, metaphysical stuff, but there was very few of those. But most of the books were dealing with the science behind consciousness. And that's why I read Edgar Mitchell stuff, and a lot of the people in our organization came during that time period between December 23rd, 2012, and I think it was May 12th, 2013, when I had that experience driving my car, which eventually led to the formation of Free. And during that time period, I was having lots of other paranormal experiences. Like I was seeing, shadow people. I was having all these synchronicities where I knew that someone was a major experiencer. It's like you could feel their energy,
when you were near somebody, knowing that they experienced
Yes. As I was, for example, the locksmith. I knew this guy was a major experiencer. The guy was changing the lock on our house. Don't tell me how, but I just knew it, Yeah. And so I would gradually start off a conversation, which eventually led to the paranormal. He was like, this guy has had sightings of dead people all of his life.
Amazing.
When he was a youngster, he saw a unicorn, a real freaking unicorn, with his friends. And they were like 12 or 13 and 14 years old. And so I was like, come on, give me a break. A unicorn? And he goes, what? You don't believe me? So immediately right in front of me, he calls his brother, who was older than him.
Yeah.
On the spot, he calls his older brother. Hey, tell this guy, about the unicorn. He doesn't believe me. And the older brother's like, come on, please. How many times I've done this stuff, And then the locksmith goes to his brother because you owe me one, brother. You owe me one, And then the youngsters, the older guy, his older brother is telling about an experience when they lived in a certain area of cities called Hialeah. At that time, years ago, it had a rural component of it. So this guy had a whole bunch of horses. They were dark colored. This is the only white horse, okay? And all the kids saw it. It had a horn on it. And so the horse, out of all these other horses, came right up to them, okay? Right up to them, okay? And they started touching the horn. This was rock solid hard, okay? And that's how they know it was a real damn unicorn. And it was like a whole group of kids, like 5 or 6 of these kids that touched the horn of the unicorn because it went right up to them, And so this man has had all these crazy paranormal experiences, And so that's just an example of what my life was for the first year after watching that UFO. It was like, yeah, it was. But I'm sure you've heard, and you might hear that from other major experiencers, the same exact thing. It's very common from major experiencers.
So why don't we do this, Ray, if you don't mind? Because there's a lot here. Obviously, like you're blowing my mind, and I've already spoken to you before. I want to have I want you back for a part 2 very, very soon. Maybe we'll record in the next few days, because I want to talk about the intermediaries that you mentioned, your 4th experience, and at least free. So at least those things, because I know that there's so much more meat on this bone.
The next major event, which called the 4th major experience, was and we can go into the details of it. That within 48 hours led to me being introduced to Mary Rodwell, Edgar Mitchell, and Rudy Shields, and the formation of Free within 48 hours. People I had never met before.
Fantastic.
And I'm just sure you asked Mary those questions. She told you the same thing.
Yes, and she was respectful enough not to give the whole story away, but she did allude to it with some details. She's so nice. I really like her.
Yeah.
Okay, so why don't we do this, Ray?
And then after Free is the CCRI stuff, which is the work I'm doing now, which is really an extension of what Free is doing. So, just to let you know that there's a lot to digest here.
There are a hell of a lot. All right, so let's put a pause on this now. So for the listener, we're cutting this short. We're doing it deliberately because we know that there's another half to come. We'll record in the next few days, right? And we'll continue the conversation.
You let me know. God bless. God bless everyone.
Thank you.
Hey, it's Enrico Colantoni here, actor, director, and dedicated napper. Like what you heard today? Make sure to subscribe to Behind Greatness and share with your friends. And consider donating to help us produce more great conversations at behindgreatness.org/donate. Until next time.